All right. Greetings, everyone. Glad to have you with us, whether you're in the room or watching online. My name is Dr. Tamika Hobbs, and I have the privilege of serving as the Library Regional Manager for the African American Research Library and Cultural Center, part of Broward County Libraries Division here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am really excited today as we officially kick off the inaugural Africana Arts and Humanities Festival here at ARLIC, as we call it. This is one of our signature events. It's actually been rebranded. For 11 years, we had the South Florida Book Festival. But as we work to put more emphasis on our role as a research library, being explicit and bringing forward the name of the humanities in our title and our work was very important. So, you are part of a historic endeavor, as it turns out. We have themed this first event Rootedness, a retrospective on 50 years of Black literature and culture, because for the past several months of this year, we have been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the organization of Broward County Libraries Division. And as we learned last night in one of our programs, this is actually the 50th anniversary of Samuel Morrison's tenure with Broward County Libraries Division. He started work in 1974. If you don't know Samuel Morrison, he was the former director of Broward County Libraries and the founder of ARLIC. And so we had a fantastic conversation with him last night called Race and Reading to soft launch and get us going along this road. And we continue today. I want to take just a moment and acknowledge the sponsors who have made all of this possible. I want to thank JM Family Enterprises, Bank of America, Visit Lauderdale, Holman, and the Fort Lauderdale Community Redevelopment Agency for their generous support of ARLIC and specifically the Africana Arts and Humanities Festival. I'd also like to bring welcome to all of you from Allison Grubbs, the director, current director of Broward County Libraries. She will be joining us a little later after she finishes with some employee recognitions. Okay, today's session is called Pulse of the People, and we are using this occasion, and so many of our sessions this year, as I posted this morning, are about us taking a moment and sitting at the knees of our elders to listen to them, to have them recount the wisdom, the lessons, the tribulations, and the triumphs of the past 50 years of their work. And those are very significant years. I know for some of us who were born kind of on the other side of the civil rights movement, there are things that we can only read about that we did not have to live through. There are opportunities that we now have that were paid for at very high cost. And so a large part of what we're doing is going to do that. Today, specifically, we're going to be looking at race and journalism. And we are so pleased to have with us none other than journalist Beatrice Bea Hines. She's a, yes, round of applause for that. I'm going to read it a little bit about her. She was born in Williston, Florida, but has lived in Miami since the age of 6 years old. She grew up in Overtown and Liberty City. Before starting at the Miami Herald's library as a file clerk in 1966, Hines worked as a domestic worker for private homes. A year later, in 1967, at the urging of a friend, Hines enrolled in Miami-Dade Community College, now Miami-Dade College, where she studied journalism for 3 years. In June of 1970, she was promoted to general assignment reporter at the Miami Herald, becoming the first African American woman to work as a reporter for the paper. She covered various assignments, beats, and in 1981, she was promoted as the paper's first African American female columnist. In 1982, her columns were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. In 1985, she was recognized as one of the top 5 female columnists in the country by Savvy magazine. The Miami Herald honored her work with a Service Among Us award. And she's also received numerous awards and accolades, including a Florida Woman of Achievement and a Woman of Impact. In conversation with her will be none other than Nadege Green, who is an independent researcher, writer, editor, community archivist, and audio producer based in Miami. Her work centers on the lived experiences of Black people in South Florida. Her practice and approach to storytelling is deeply rooted in the history and first person narratives that explore and connect issues around race, culture, climate justice, health inequities, poverty, and displacement. Her reporting has appeared in NPR, on NPR, WLRN News, Marketplace, PRI's The World, and in the Miami Herald. She is a frequent lecturer, and speaker in academic and community settings around disparities in Miami-Dade, community storytelling, local history, and race. A child of Haitian immigrants and former farm workers, she was born and raised in the county of Dade. Please give a round of applause to both of our speakers today as they take the stage.
Okay. Is your mic on, B?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, I have to say, first, thank you to Arlick for having us this morning. And I have to say, it's always an honor to be in community with B. I call her Mama B. B
That's
Hines
right.
is one of
I'm
my
your mama.
mentors. And it's so fun to be on stage with, we were colleagues together at the Herald, sat right next to each other in the Pembroke Pines office that no
That's
longer
right.
exists. And B used to share her lunch with me, y'all, and give me sweet potato pie. So like we go way back.
It's about time for another sweet potato pie, I think.
I agree. She owes me a pie. But I have to say, B, like as a Black journalist in Miami, we stand on your shoulders. And I am so grateful for all you have done and all you continue to do in your mentorship, but also in showing up and taking up space and being visible and telling our stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's start with the beginning. How did you even get into journalism? What was the opening for you?
Okay. Let me see where I should start now because first I should tell you that I need you to know that I'm 86 and I'm only telling you that because I go way back and my mother goes back even further. And so she never, and I always leaned to the arts, writing, drawing. I, I can sew a mean wedding dress. And I did that for a while for a lot of my friends and all. Um, but she never encouraged me, and she loved me, but she never encouraged me, mainly because she didn't know any Black people in the fields that I wanted to enter. And so when I did go back I married young. She did not let me take a scholarship in voice when I was a senior in high school. I got a scholarship to Knoxville College in voice because she thought that I thought I could be another Marian Anderson. And I couldn't tell her any different. She didn't know that I could use that scholarship to do whatever, to study whatever I wanted to. But anyway, I knew she loved me and she didn't want me to be disappointed. And so I got married early. I was 19 when I didn't go to college next year. I got married. At 20, I became a mother. At 24, I became a widow. And by that time, I had two little boys. One was 4 and one was 15 months. And so, with only a high school diploma and a couple of years, I did study business. They had a business school downtown. It was Carroll something Business School. I don't remember the full name of it. And so they opened their doors to Black people. And I took courses at night there. But I couldn't find a job using those skills. So I went to work as a maid. And the thing that really encouraged me to get out of that job as a maid was when the family that I worked for I worked for two families. One woman I worked for one day, and the other family had three children. I worked for her 4 days. And the woman I worked for 4 days was the one that I depended on mainly because I made the most money. I was a day worker, and she paid me $8 a day. The one that I worked for one day, she paid me $10 a day. That was a good piece of money. And we're talking 1960, 61, 62, 60, this was 63. And so when they went away that summer, the woman said to me, I hope you can find something while we are gone. And so she left me high and dry. And it was that thing that she did to me at that time that made me think, why am I doing this? And things were beginning to change. This is now, it's not, now it's like 1964.
Before you move on, can you
Mhm.
set the scene on what was happening in Miami at that time?
Okay,
Like,
yes.
what was
Yeah,
Miami?
Miami was totally segregated. Although things had started to open up, we were able to go to uh, some restaurants. This is in the 1960s. Um, but on Miami Beach, they still wanted you to, and I worked on Miami Beach, they still wanted you to have an ID to come over, you know. So that was the rule, and they hadn't changed the law. Well, in my own quiet way, I wanted to protest. I never got one, and I wanted them to stop me, but nobody ever did. Nobody ever stopped me. And so the only jobs that were available to Black people, this, and I'm talking, this is around 1964. I had friends who had gone to college to become teachers, and they could, because schools were segregated, they couldn't find, there were not enough schools to hire all the Black teachers that were coming out of college. And so they took jobs working as maids. And one of my dear friends, she who's passed on now, and I know how she was the val of her class at Booker T. Washington High School, graduated at 16, and she married early, but she went to school every summer. She had a husband who helped her, and he sent her every year. He took care of the children while she went to Tallahassee every summer to get her degree. And when she got out of school, she didn't have a job. She didn't have a teaching job until something opened up. But anyway, that was the scene then. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do it. The signs in the buses was still up in the mid 60s that said colored seat from rear. Some stores like Food Fair, which was a giant a food store chain, had colored and white signs on their water fountains. And this is in the mid 60s. It took them a long time to take them down. And then in 1965, was it the 1965 Civil Rights Amendment that Johnson signed into law, the President Johnson? And that's when employers and businesses, and at that time, the advertising section of the paper was 2 inches thick. And so I would sit down every Sunday. They had to put next to their, if they wanted somebody to work for them, they had to say, "We are an equal opportunity employer." That was the law. They had to do that. Now, they didn't have to hire you, but they had to say that. And so I'm getting excited because I see that, and I call these places. And one of them, and I knew I could do a bank, I could be a bank teller because I had the little business training. And so the woman was so nice to me. She talked to me, and she says, "Oh, yes." I said, "Well, I had some business training, but I graduated high school. I have a high school diploma. I haven't gone to college." And she said, "Well, that's okay. This job doesn't require a college education, but the business side would help." And so she said, "And so what high school did you attend?" And I said, "Booker T. Washington High School."
The best.
And she said, "Oh, well, back in those days, white people didn't go to Black schools." So she knew then. I guess I had my white voice on the phone. But she didn't, she didn't recognize me as being Black until I said Booker T. Washington High School. And so she said, "Oh, well, I have to call my supervisor." So he came on the phone. And right away he said, "That job has been filled as of right now." Bam. And so from then on, I looked for jobs that had post office box addresses that I had to write to, and the Miami Herald was one. And so after I read the comics to my children that Sunday, I sat down. I didn't have a typewriter. They wanted you to send a letter of application. They didn't want. There was no phone number that you could
What was the
call.
ad? What did the ad say?
The ad said they wanted. They were looking for a file clerk for the library, which was the morgue at the paper, and that and the requirements
And
was
the morgue at the paper for non-newspaper folks is where the old editions go and where they
right.
archive
Mhm.
the old paper. I saw some faces like, what? It's where the old edition goes. So like today's paper is
Dead news.
archived. Yeah. So they call it the morgue because the news, it's dead. It's like not new news, but it's where they store all of the old
Right.
newspapers to reference for future purposes.
So there was not much typing needed, and so what I did was I wrote a nice letter, and I wish there were young people in here so I could tell them to please pay attention to your teachers.
So we have
Because,
one.
well, oh yes, Noah is here. Yes,
That's,
Noah is such a young man. I forget that he's a child.
that's my
But
son.
but when I was in the eighth grade, I had a teacher named Jane Lewis, who was my business teacher, my junior business. She taught us not only how to prepare income tax, um, to write business letters and letters of application, what a resume was. And so I pulled all of that knowledge that I had learned in the eighth grade, and I am also now 27 years old. And I wrote that letter. I put a plain sheet of paper on top of a lined piece of paper. And I have a nice handwriting. And I took my time and I wrote the letter of application. I gave them my qualifications. And then on another page, I wrote a resume which they did not ask for, but I wanted to impress them. And 2 days later, I got a call asking me when can I come down for an interview. And I went down on my next day off, which was Wednesday, and they took me in and tested me all day long for a file clerk's position. It wasn't until 9 years later, after I'd become a reporter, that I realized they'd given me the reporter's exam also. And so then they told me that they would get in touch with me. And then a couple of days later, I got a call from the supervisor in the library who said, Mrs. Hines, we just want you to know that you're hired if you want the job. And we'll pay you $60 a week. And I said, thank you, I'll accept it. And when I got off the phone, I said to my mother, I got the job at the Miami Herald, Mama, and I'll be making $60 a week. And my little boy, my younger son, was 5 at the time, and he heard me and he started jumping up and down. Oh, mommy, mommy, we're rich. We're rich. $60. So when you're 5 years old in 1965, you were rich. So anyway, I went to work that first day, the first Monday, and they asked me if I could start the following Monday. But because I wanted to be fair to the woman I worked for, I gave her 2 weeks' notice, and I asked them if I could start first Monday in January, which would have been January, the first Monday in 1966. And so that's when I started my job at the Miami Herald. And I'll never forget when I went in to tell the woman that I worked for, I was leaving to go to the Miami Herald. And she said these words to me. She used to say all the time, maids were a dime a dozen. She said that to me. And I used to say to myself, because I was taught not to talk back, I'm from the old school too. And I said to myself, yeah, but you won't get one like me. And she didn't, because I was very loyal to her. I treated her children like they were my own children. I loved my children at home, and then I had to leave them and go to her and love her children, who she taught by the time they were 4 and 5 not to let me hug them anymore because I was Black. And so one day, the little boy that I was hugging didn't want to hug me anymore, and he started crying. And I thought, what's going on here? And then when I was bathing the little girl who was a year older one night, and she said, I said she was getting, I noticed a little attitude. And so I was trying to warm up, and I said, you're so pretty and you're such a sweet girl. And I was just praising her, and she said, and you're ugly and you're Black. And she had a birthmark right here, and it was about the size of a 50 cents piece. And I said, oh my goodness. And it was my color. The birthmark was brown. I said, oh my goodness, that thing looked like it's getting bigger. I said, I don't know, it could spread all over your body after a while. And I was hoping she would tell her mother, which she did, but her mother never confronted me. because I wanted to find out why would you do this to your child. And so the next time I was bathing, and mommy says I'm going to have plastic surgery to have this, and I said, yeah, but it's a birthmark. I'm not so sure it won't come back. But her mother never came to me because I wanted to ask, why would you do this? We have loved your children. There were two of us working in the home. We have loved them and cuddled them. I potty trained the baby. He wouldn't eat for anybody else but me. Why would you? And incidentally, he didn't know that when he started talking, he wanted to call me mommy because I'm mommy to him. But he knows that I look different. And so when his mother would be coming down the corridor and I would be dressing him in the morning, I'd say, okay, here comes mommy. I said, oh, here comes mommy. Let's get dressed. Let's hurry up. And he started picking up on oh. So when he'd hear his mother coming down the hall, he said, B, here comes O. Here comes oh. She thought it was funny. I thought it was so sad that her baby didn't know to call her mommy. That was so sad to me. But anyway, she said, when I told her I was going to leave, she says, well, as soon as Johnson is no longer in the chair, things are going to go back to the way they used to be. And I said to her, that could be very true. But here's one person who's going to be able to say, the door opened and I walked through. I may have to come back out, but I walked through.
That's right.
And that's the way I left it.
Those early years inside the Miami Herald, our workplaces are microcosms of what's happening outside the workplace. What were those early years for you like at the Herald as a file clerk, and how did you come to get the position as a reporter?
Okay, as you heard in my bio, I had a friend who was going back to school and she wanted company. So we this was in 1967 after I'd been at the Herald for about a year, a year. And so we went together. And at first I was going to become a teacher because I knew my mother didn't know anything about journalism and she had to be my babysitter and I wasn't going to upset her. So when she asked me, I told her I was studying education. So anyway, and I was at first. So as I started when I went to the Herald, it wasn't easy. Some people were nice, most people were not. Some people would speak to me in the building, but when we walked outside, because at that time Jordan Marsh and Omni was over, and many of us went over there for lunch or we went shopping on our lunch out, and they would walk past me. We worked side by side in the office, and they walked past me on the sidewalk like they didn't know who I was, like I didn't exist. The invisible man, the invisible woman. And so there was a young woman in my office who had a little boy he was about 2 or 3 years younger than my younger son. And so I was in the bathroom one morning and I came out of the stall and she was coming in. And I walked to the sink to wash my hands and she said, how did you know to do that? And I said, do what? How did you know that you're supposed to wash your hands when you use the bathroom? And I laughed because I thought she was joking. She was dead serious. She had believed all the lies and the stories that she'd heard about nasty Negroes and didn't know how to wash their hands and didn't know. But yet we took care of their babies.
That part.
We cleaned their homes,
Cooked
and
for
yet we were
them.
so nasty. And I said, well, I thought everybody did this. But I tell you one thing, we used to do coffee and donut runs. They never got my coffee and donuts again because they didn't wash their hands. They didn't know that you were supposed to wash your hands. Uh, but there were challenges in the office. I ignored them. I wore my hair natural. It was much longer then, and I would pull it back, and I had the little soft natural curls, and they all wanted to touch my hair, and it was soft. And so one day, one of them touched it, and her hand went straight down to my scalp, and she said, "Oh, it's soft. What did you think it was going to feel like?" I think she thought it was going to feel like steel wool or something. And she was shocked. But little things like that, I had to endure those things.
But can we pause for a moment that
Sure.
is still happening?
Yes,
till
it
this
really,
day.
it is. It really is.
I had locks when I was at the Herald, and
I
someone
remember.
asked me about like, what is that? I'm like, what is what? My
Mm-hmm.
hair?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
some stories remain the
Some
same.
surgery. And it's hard sometimes when you have to work. First of all, you got to work so hard to prove yourself. And then you go home, you got to take care of your family. You got to come back and you got to face all that hostility, but you don't take it home because you got young children and you don't want your children to think this is the way it's going to be all the time. So I never told my children what I was going through. They didn't know until they were grown about some of the things that I had to go through. There was one time when I would eat alone. I would always eat alone. The Herald had their own cafeteria,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't go to the cafeteria. And the first time I went to the cafeteria, I was invited by one of my coworkers in the library who had befriended me. She was an older woman. And she said, "Oh, why don't you have lunch with us today?" And so I said, "Okay, if the other women won't mind." And sure enough, I went in, and Hazel was so cute, and she was so happy to bring me in. And when we sat down, the other ladies got up and left. And I knew, but she was embarrassed, but I knew and I understood. And I told her it was okay. So I started eating at that time, our building was right on the bay and they had benches behind the building. And I would go out and sit and meditate. And that is how I got through. I prayed and meditated as I ate my lunch and watched the birds and the boats go by. And when I went back into the building, I was able to face that hostile environment. But I was lucky that I had, or blessed that I had a supervisor who was kind. And he allowed me to, if I found classes that I could take in the day, he would let me work at night. And so that is how I met the book editor of the Miami Herald, the late Fred Shaw. He was the vice president of Miami Dade, and he was also our book editor. And we became friends, and I would ask him to read my papers that I had to turn in. And one night he read a paper and he said, "B," he said, "what did you tell me you were studying?" And I said, "I'm going to be a teacher." And he said, "No, you need to change your major to journalism." And I laughed in his face. And I said, "But I'm black. They're not going to hire me." Like he couldn't see that I was black, right? And he didn't laugh at all. He said, "B, things are changing and you need to get ready for the change." And I took his advice. And the next semester, I changed my major to
And what
journalism.
school were you at?
That was at Miami Dade. But I could never tell my mama. She was keeping my children, and she thought I was a dreamer anyway, and that I was never going to amount to anything because I dreamed all the time. And so whenever she would ask me, I said, "Oh, I'm studying education, and I was getting an education. It wasn't a lie." Yeah, I didn't want to lie to her. I had to kind of work my way around that. And so, but she was suspicious, though. Mamas can do
Yeah,
that.
they know.
And so then, but my mother was going through. She was a young grandma. She was going through the menopause. Some of y'all understand what that's like. Thank God I didn't have it too bad, but my mother was having a hard time. And then I had these two little boys, and one of them was going through the adolescent stage. And he would stand behind doors, and when my mother passed by, he'd say, "Boo!" She would jump out of her skin, and he would get so tickled. And so I thought, okay, I can't do this right now. And then they wanted me home with them more because Mama was really strict on them. And so I had to withdraw. And as I was walking across the campus on the way to my counselor's office, and the tears was running down, locking under my chin, and I'm praying and saying, "Lord, you know what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do this. I want to make a better life for my children, for myself." And I just prayed and walked. And when I got into his office, he was so sad that I was withdrawing. And he said, "Is there anything we could do?" I said, "Right now, I just have to do this because my mother couldn't take it anymore. And I couldn't take it anymore. I was going to go crazy." And so this was in April. And God hears prayers. I want you to know that. I don't know who is a believer in this audience, and it doesn't matter. But God hears prayers, and He honors you when you try to do the right thing. And so in April, I'm withdrawing from school. And in June, I get a call around June 1st from, I was off, it was on a Monday. Hazel, my good friend in the library, calls me and says she's angry with me because the rumor is out that I'm going to be a reporter in the newsroom.
Mhm.
And I don't know anything about it. And I said, that's not true, Hazel. Oh, yes, it is, she said. Everybody's talking about it. I said, okay, give me Lewis's number. He was off on, that was a supervisor. I didn't want Lewis to think that I had been seeking another job without talking to him because he was so kind to me. So I called him at home. He was also off. I said, Lewis, don't believe that rumor that's going around. I am not a reporter. He said, yes, you are. And I said, nobody told me. He said, well, they were going to call you on your the next day. I was Tuesday.
Mhm.
He said, Larry Jenks is going to call you in his office and explain everything to you. And he said, remember when I came back? He called me to his office on Friday, and I came back to the desk and I said, more problems. And I said, what's going on? And he said, oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. He didn't want to lose me.
Yeah.
So he said, that's why I said that. And of course, now I'm really praying because I don't know about this. This is the first I've heard about it. And my mother came home and I told her that I was going to the newsroom as a reporter. And she was so shocked. And so I said, just pray, Mama. And the next door neighbor who was also a member of our church, and I asked her to pray. And so when
What neighborhood were you growing up at the time?
I was in Liberty City at the time. I was living in Liberty City on 67th Street, right down the street from my church, between 30, across the street from the Liberty Square Housing Project, which they named Pork and Beans. And I had grown up in that project from age 13. It wasn't Pork and Beans then. It was a nice place to live. So anyway, I talked to I went in the next morning, and Larry Jenks, managing editor, called me into his office, and he said, B, we want to give you a trial basis, a 3 month trial basis as a reporter. And the reason he was doing that was because two women, Juanita Green, the late Juanita Green, and the late Helen Coram. Helen looked like a model. She was a very beautiful, tall woman, and we were the same age. Juanita was like 10 years older, but we were all friends, and they befriended me. And they wanted to, I worked for the Falcon Times, which is the paper for the North Campus at the
Mhm.
time. And they always went to see my stories that I wrote. And I did not know that they were taking the stories and letting Larry read them, Larry Jenks read them. And this is why, and also my journalism teacher, the late Barbara Garfunkel, wrote him a letter. And none of this, I knew none of this. I knew nothing of this, that I was, why don't you, I have this, she said, I have this wonderful, mature young woman in my class who works for your company. Why don't you give her a chance? And nobody said anything to me about that. And when I went in, Larry told me all these stories, and I was just so shocked. And he said, we're going to give you a trial period of 3 months and a $10 raise. Well, my friends, I would have taken that job for zero raise. I just wanted a chance to show them what I could do. And so he said, you're going to start in 2 weeks. And that would have been June the 15th, which was a Monday. And I said, well, I would like to keep my same day off. I had some nerve, huh?
And we
and
must have nerve.
and because I had two children going to school, and I visited the schools to check on them from time to time. And I explained that, and he said, okay. He said, well, you can work Tuesday through Saturday, which was fine. I said, okay. And so I went in. That I did not know. We didn't have a television. And the night before I was supposed to go to work, the 1970 riot started in Liberty City. And do you know who Gladys Taylor was? Did you know that name?
No, I didn't know her.
Gladys Taylor was a young black mother. I think she had 5 children, at 5 or 6 children, and she was on welfare. And people thought she didn't know anything because she talked like this and she wore white wigs. Very intelligent woman, very smart. And but she was having having her checks cashed at a store, an A&G grocery store on 54th Street and 62nd, 54th Street and 27th Avenue. And they were really charging her an enormous amount of money to cash her welfare check. And one day she was complaining about it one night, and they got in an argument. Some black men were there, and one thing led to another, and they started to fight, and the riot broke out. Well, I didn't know all about this until I got to work that Tuesday morning, dressed up in my Sunday clothes, my high heel shoes, and the library friends had given me a white purse to carry my notebooks in. And I went stepping in the office like I was Miss Brenda Starr. I don't know how many of you all know about Brenda Starr, the comic strip reporter. Well, that was one of my favorite comic strips. And she always dressed really beautifully. So I stepped in that Tuesday morning all dressed up, thinking I was Miss Brenda Starr. And Larry met me and asked me, told me, he said, B, there's a riot in Liberty City. And I didn't know because, as I said, I didn't have and I didn't listen to the radio that night, and we didn't have a TV. So I didn't know what was going on. And it was like a stone's throw really from where I lived. I lived on 13th Avenue. The riot was on 27th Avenue. So we were further east of the riot. And so I said, no, I didn't know. He said, would you be afraid to cover it? And I'm saying in my mind, is Brer Rabbit scared of the briar patch? And I went in my high heels. Do you all know who Brer Rabbit was? Okay, I just want to make sure you knew who Brer Rabbit was, because Brer Fox was always trying to hurt him, and he would always say, "Please, please throw me in the briar patch," because that's where he lived. But anyway, I went to the briar patch that day with my high heel shoes on, and they were asking everybody to stay off the streets. And so I had no credentials. I didn't have a press card. Didn't have time to get my picture taken to put on a press card or anything. But I went out with a notebook and Larry Jenks' phone number. And I stopped at every police car I saw and told them who I was, gave them Larry Jenks's phone number. If they didn't believe me, I said, I'm covering the riot. And they hadn't seen a black reporter
Ever.
ever, not a black one. Well, before I came, there was one black reporter, Thoroughly Smith. He was the first black reporter who was my dear friend from childhood. I was in the library when he came, but he couldn't. Thoroughly had worked in Washington for a while, and he wasn't used to the blatant racism in the workplace. And he wasn't a reporter, he was a teacher. And he'd come back home to work, and Garth Reeves arranged for him to get that job at the Miami Herald. And I'll never forget the day he
And
came.
Garth Reeves is the founder of the
Yes,
Miami
the
Times,
founder
the
and
largest
publisher of the
black-owned
Miami,
newspaper.
right. And I never forget the day he came back and told me that he couldn't do this job anymore. The racism in the city room was so bad, he just couldn't take it anymore. And I begged him, I said, if you leave, we won't have anybody else. We won't have a black voice, because they had hired another black reporter whose name was Granville Reed at the same time, a little short time after they hired Thoroughly. But he went to Tampa to work for a TV station. He didn't stay there longer than 3 or 4 months. And so when Thoroughly left, and Thoroughly is the brother, the late brother of Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. And I've known her since she was a little girl with hair bows, because her brother and I were in the sixth grade together, and she was like in the second grade when we were at Liberty City Elementary School. And so when he left, it left a void. So when I came to the Miami Herald as a reporter, and they sent me out to cover the riot, people thought that I started the riot so I could have something to write about. That's not true. I'm a peace loving person. I wouldn't do that. But anyway, when I went out on the street and I walked in, I was passing a store front, and these two men were standing in the doorway, and I heard one of them say, "Man, this riot is hurting my business." And I backed up and I said, "Excuse me, sir, what is your business?" And I told him who I was. And he said, "I'm a hustler." I didn't know what that was. So I said, "Oh, you mind if I interview you?" And he said, "What do you want to know?" And I asked him his name. He told me he was Iceberg Slim. And hustling meant that he had women on the street. He had, and the riot, he couldn't put them on the street. So it was hurting his business. So I didn't have any better sense than to go back to the Herald and tell them I had a story. And they said, and they said, "Okay, write it. Let's see what you have." They told me to go sit at a desk that nobody was sitting. And I went there and I wrote it. And I turned it in, and they loved it and put it on the front page of the paper, my very first story. And the reason Larry said it was such a sad time and such a horrible time that the story was light and kind of funny, and it was what they needed at that time. And so my very first story for the Miami Herald ran front page. And that night I got home, and my children were so sweet. They took one took the shoe off, and the other one took the shoe off, and they rubbed my feet. And I was so tired. My brother had just come home from England. He was in the Air Force, and they were all so proud of me. They couldn't wait to hear the stories that I had to tell. And then the next day I went in, and I was sort of thinking that everybody was going to be so happy to see me. Not. The guys on the desk. Well, first of all, I was able to cover some areas that some of the white reporters couldn't, because they didn't want any white reporters in the meetings.
Mhm.
And so I would go into these meetings, but I couldn't take notes because they didn't want news people in at all. But God gave me a good memory. And so I remembered names and places and details. And then I would go back to the Herald and I would dictate it to somebody because I didn't want my byline on it. And I did this for about 2 or 3 times. And then one time I was in a meeting, and one of the guys said, "Hey man, did you see that story in the paper this morning? We got a spy in here, because that was word for word." And I wanted to say that was me. That was me. But I couldn't blow my cover. But you know who blew my cover? Miss Gladys Taylor. I told you she was a smart woman, and she watched and saw things, and she was watching when nobody else was looking. And she kept watching me because she hadn't seen me before. She didn't know who I was. I wasn't one of the people that was in her crowd. And anyway, she asked me one day, "And what agency you with?" And I said, "I'm not with an agency. I'm a concerned citizen." That wasn't good enough. She kept needling me until finally I told her I was a reporter. And that's how my cover was blown. But by that time, I got most of the stories, so it was okay. And it was accurate, so they knew that I was telling the truth, and I wasn't the enemy. And so later on, as things died down, and there's no more riot stories to write, the city desk, which is mainly white men, there were like about 4 or 5 white women in the newsroom at the time, and like 200 white men. And one woman was an editor, Rose Allegado, but she was not my editor, and she was not my assignment editor. One of the white men editors would assign my stories, and they would give me the worst assignments. One time I got an assignment. I didn't know it was a dump. They just gave me the address, and I forgot what was going on at that time. They told me, but they told me to go out and cover, take a look, and see what was going on. Come back and write a story. I drove, and at that time I had a car with no air, and I was wearing Polly and her sister Esther clothes. And if any of you in here know about polyester, you know it's hot stuff. And with no air conditioning, and it's in the summertime, so I'm driving along thinking that I'm going to get this story, and they're going to be proud. I'm going to write this great story. And I get there and I say, "Oh my goodness, it's the dump."
Hmm.
And I realize now that they have pulled one on me. So I'm thinking, I sort of paused there, parked my car before I went up. There was nobody behind me. And I said, "Okay, Lord, what do I do?" And then I said, "Okay, just go in, because if you don't go and you don't do, they'll say, well, you don't follow instructions." So I went in and rode up and begged God not to let me fall down in all that dump. Because, at that time, the dump was ugly and dusty and buzzard flying overhead. Now they fix it where there's grass, and it's kind of pretty looking. It looks like a pretty green hill. But back then it wasn't. So I didn't sink down in the dirt. I came back. But I'm so angry now because I got 2 children to support, and they're playing games with me. And so I got a song. The way I calmed myself down was I sang a gospel song all the way back downtown. And by the time I got into the building, I was feeling pretty good. And I said, "Oh, you know what? Somebody made a mistake on this assignment. Did you know that was a county dump?" Like they did not know. And they couldn't even look at me. okay, B, we'll find something else for you to do. So I went down, and after about two or three more incidents like that, I was sent where a family of six, a woman with six children had been evicted, which was a non-story, and she was living in the park in Coconut Grove, which was not true. I went there, and then they would send me on stories to do where I had to speak to Hispanic people. Many of them didn't speak English. I did not speak Spanish, but somehow they spoke enough broken English that I always got the story. That's how God works. I always got the story. And one of the reasons I got the story was because they were so in awe of the fact that the Herald sent a black woman to interview them. They wanted to know, where did I come from? How did you get this job? Tell me about yourself. And by the time I told them my story, we were friends. And I could get anything from them that I wanted. And they were always so surprised at the Herald that I came back with the story. And I didn't speak Spanish. And so another time, they sent me out to do, the war was ending, the Vietnam War was ending, and they did a special. I had the back cover to do, and they sent me out to interview this man who lost his only son in Vietnam, and they wanted me to interview him. And I don't know what I'm going to say to this man because he's in pain.
Yeah.
So I'm praying all the way there. I get to the door and I knock on the door, and he opens the door, and I said, "I'm Bea Hines from the Miami Herald." And he says, "Come in." And then he said to me, "You have you have got to be married." I said, "Well, yes, I'm a widow." He said, "Because nobody would name their child Bea Hines." So the name was an icebreaker. The name was an icebreaker, so I got the story. But there was so many stories like that that I could tell you. But when I became when I was promoted to, and incidentally, I got little raises going along, because I was started out on the bottom of the rung. But when I became a columnist, which is a big thing, I never got a raise. I think they thought I wouldn't last, but I lasted for 4.5 years on the front page of the local section. And the only reason I was removed was because the editor, who had been a thorn in my side for must be 9 years, who tried everything in her book, in her power, to get me fired because she didn't like me because I was black. And I prayed. Did I tell you prayer? God answers prayers. I didn't pray any bad prayers for her. You know what I prayed? I prayed for God to promote her, and He did. He sent her all the way to Boulder, Colorado, and she was promoted. It was a big job. She was a publisher, and while she was gone, my career was just going up and up. But then she came back. While she was away, I was nominated for the Pulitzer. Um, I I did, although
Yeah,
they
go
were
ahead. Clap it up for me.
uh, but when she came back, she did not like the fact that I had this position. And so she started creating stories. One time the editor called me into his office and said he heard that did a lot of public speaking for the Herald, that I went out and I badmouthed the Herald when I was up. And I said, "Are you crazy? I'm going to bite the hand that feeds me." I said, "I write memos to you all about things that I think are unjust." And I did. I thought one time they were going to fire me because I wrote so many memos about things that I thought they were not doing right. And I said, "But when I go on the street, I am Miss Miami Herald."
Mhm.
I said, "I build the paper up. I do not tear the paper down." But he believed that that was the way they had to do to get me off the front page of the local section. And so he said, "Well, we're going to move the column and suspend you for a while." And I said, "Would you please, I would like to confront the person who told you that. I want them to tell you in my face that this is what I've been doing." And he said, "Well, we don't want to cause any fiction. We don't want that. You don't need to know who told me." But I did learn. I found out who it was. And so I did. I wrote my own note and put it on the bulletin board, and people were so angry. Some of the reporters were so angry what was happening to me. And I told them that I would be suspended from writing the column And I told him why. And then he ran out from his office and said, "Why did you say that?" I said, did you not tell me that I had to write a note and say that I was being suspended? But I didn't mean for you to write and put that in the note and put it on the bulletin board. I said, "It's there." That's what you told me to do. And so I said, Lord, I didn't ask for that job as a columnist, and I'm thankful that I had it for 4.5 years, and I'm thankful for all the things that you were able to get done through it. But I wasn't born with it, and so I'm okay. I'm all right. And so they sent me to Neighbors, where I had to write 2 columns plus a feature story every week. And nobody else had that kind of load with me. And I had a wonderful woman who became my editor, whose name was Suzanne Levinson. Did you know
I
Suzanne?
did.
Suzanne said to me one day, B, she said, "I'm not supposed to tell you this, B, but they're trying to fire you. So keep your backside covered."
And today, how long have you been at the Herald?
At that time, this was in the 80s. So I had been there I'd been a writer for about 12 or 15 years at that time. And so, meanwhile, the Miami-Dade College, community college, asked me to be their commencement speaker. And Suzanne was so sweet. I said, "I don't know what to do. I'm not sure I can do this." She said, "You can do this. And you're going to write your speech and we're going to run it in the paper." And that's what she did. And the woman who's been trying to fire me should have been coming to me saying, "Congratulations." She never said anything. She also kept me from going to Africa. The United Nations invited me on a junket to Africa. And before they had let reporters go, but because it's me and she's on this road to get me fired, she wouldn't let me. Everybody who was anybody at the Herald went to her office and said, "This would be a good thing, not only for the paper, not only for B, but for the paper and for the community." And so she said no. And then she said to me, the reason I couldn't go because I might have to write a story about the United Nations and it would be a conflict of interest. And in 55 years, I have never written a story about the United Nations, but it was just her way of keeping me down. But the next year, the late Georgia Tasco was invited on a junket by the United Nations, and she was allowed to go.
And Georgia is white.
Georgia is white. And so those are the kinds of things that you have to encounter. But when I was named or promoted to columnist, the managing editor at that time wrote this glowing article about me. And he knew the story about when I was a maid, one woman that I worked for used to put out a broken dish and a chipped cup and tarnished silverware. And that's what I was supposed to use to have my lunch because she went to work. She was a career woman. This is a woman I worked for one day. And she thought she didn't know she was prejudiced. She didn't know she was racist. She used to send my church tithe, part of her tithing every month. But she would always tell me, "Beatrice, you are just a girl." Now I'm a girl. I have 2 children. I'm working. I'm taking care of my children, but I'm just a girl. So anyway, I never said anything back to her. But when she went to work, I got her nice dishes and her nice silverware. And that's what if I ate lunch, that's what I used. And then she used to tell me, "Now, Beatrice, I want you to do the bathroom last." Now I know why she's saying that. So I went in, and the first thing I did was the bathroom because I had to use it too.
Mhm.
And so, I know some of you saw The Maid, that movie, The Maid, or The Help.
The
The
help.
Help. And that's true. But I never did what that other lady did with the pot. I never did that. Uh, but anyway, those were some of the things that I had to go through. But the lady saw they wrote that in the paper. And I said I did that because I'm somebody, and I had to keep my own self-esteem up. And when the story ran, she called me the next day. It ran on a Sunday. That Monday, this woman called me. She recognized herself. We didn't call any names, but she recognized herself, and she wanted to invite me and my mother to lunch.
Mhm.
And I think she wanted to apologize, but for some reason we never got around to it, and she died. And that's one of my biggest regrets, that I did not allow her the opportunity to say I'm sorry, because I really think that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to invite us to lunch and eat off her good china.
I really appreciate you setting the stage for the early days, because so much of the history of what folks endure is not what is visible about these institutions.
That's true.
It's not what we hear, it's not what we see, it's not written down anywhere. Um, but can you talk about where things are with you now before we open up to questions? Because I know you guys definitely
Okay,
want
let us know,
questions.
because I can go on and on and on. I have a million stories.
And we can sit here and listen to you all day. I'm like, I have not seen the timer yet from Tamika, so I'm like, let's keep going. But you are such a griot, and you are such a vital part of our community. You are a pillar, and so it is our absolute honor to hear you speak and to share your story. Because again, we stand on your shoulders. If not for
Thank
the
you.
work that you have done, many of our stories would not appear in the Miami Herald.
Well, thank you. Well, today, I'm honored. My children, like Nadege and Femi, they always tell me I deserve it. But I've been getting so many accolades lately, even from the paper that I work for. They've had me up a couple of times, a chat with Bea Hines, and they set it up and then make a big deal out of it, and had a big stir on the front page. Last year, Rihanna was on the top, and I was right beneath her on the front page of the Miami Herald. So I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Because I was like the bottom of the rung, and all of a sudden I'm here, and I'm being elevated, and people are giving me all these accolades, and especially from the paper. And so I'm thankful, but I'm suspicious. I don't, I, you know, I keep it at arm's length, because any day the bubble can burst.
Mhm.
The people who put you up there can really knock you down. And so I don't get a big head over stuff like that. I thank God that it's happening, and I'm happy that it's happening, but I have a level head. I know that things could turn any minute, and they can. We are living in a climate where it's not a good time for anybody of color. It really isn't. Even though it may seem like, oh, we got these people in this position, we got people in this position, but you don't know the things that they have to go through,
Mhm.
and the fights that they have to do to fight to stay there, and to make the people that they're working for look good. And so I keep people like Dr. Hodge and Nadege and Femi and all of you in prayer. All of you who are facing the fight, who are on the front line, because that's what's going on. We are still fighting to be equal, and I think we won't be equal until we're dead, really, because people don't want. When I heard the first time I heard the slogan "Make America Great Again," that bothered me. Back then, things were not great for Black people or people of color. What do you mean? You mean you want to go back to slavery or something like that, or segregation or Jim Crow-ism? What do you want? What do you mean? I think a better slogan would be, um, "Let's make America greater." That would have been a better slogan. But that man knew what he was saying.
I appreciate your word on suspicion, because I think people always expect Black folks to just be grateful because you're doing something.
Mhm.
But what is honor without repair?
I'm sorry.
Honor without repair, and acknowledging the past,
That's
right?
right.
Because there's a way in which we move forward, especially in South Florida,
Mhm.
that says, like, look how far we've come. And I'm like, but have we even acknowledged the past?
That's right.
Have we actually tried to repair the harms that have been done?
Mhm.
Has there ever been an apology?
Never, never. People who hurt me never apologize to me. They just treat me nice, and they smooth it over. And they don't know that I remember.
Hmm.
They don't know that I remember. Do I have time to tell one little story? When in 1954, when I was in the 10th grade, and the Brown versus Topeka, Kansas decision was made desegregating the schools in the country. The Miami Herald sent a photographer to Booker T. Washington High School to interview 4 students. And the same photographer went to a white school and interviewed 4 students about how they felt about going to school with whites or, whatever. I was not one of those interviewed, but the late T. Stewart Greer, who was our student council president and who later became a really top person in Miami-Dade County school system, was one time the interim superintendent of Dade County schools until they found someone else. But they interviewed him. He was a senior, and all the black children were looking down like this when the paper came out, and all the white children were looking up, smiling. Well, we can't look at white people because we don't know, we can't look at them in the eye. That was the myth. And so when the paper came out that next day, our principal was livid. He called us an assembly and he talked to us, and then he allowed T. Stewart Greer and the other students to explain why they were looking down. The photographer had asked them to look at a piece of paper to read the story about what was happening with the integration decision. And while they were reading it, he was snapping their picture. And that's what they put in the paper. So those tricks, those little tricks, they may seem ever so simple, but those are the ones that they use to try to keep us down and to make us look like. That's why that lady didn't know I was supposed to she didn't know that knew that I was supposed to wash my hands when I came in, because somebody told her those lies about us and she believed them. And so years later, I've been writing about that. I tell our story. I talk about what it used to be like and how I've told that story a couple of times in my column about T. Stewart Greer.
Yeah.
And I didn't know his grandchild was in a funeral service. I didn't even know her. She knew me as I was walking in, and she grabbed my hand and hugged me, and she said, "Thank you, Miss Hines." And then when I was coming out, she says, "I'm T. Stewart Greer's granddaughter." You never know. You never know. She was glad that I told that story. We need to tell our stories. We need to let people know we didn't say anything back then, maybe because we couldn't. But now that you've given me a voice, it's hard to shut me up. It's very hard to shut me up. Then they could tell you that.
And on that note, because we want to keep you talking, I would love to open it up to the audience for any questions you might have for our fabulous Bea Hines. And please give her another round of applause.
Can I say too, I just want to thank you all for coming out, because this is a weekday morning, and you could have been doing anything else, but thank you for showing up. Thank you.
So any audience questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
We have a microphone, 'cause we want the audience watching digitally to also hear you.
You mentioned that one of your regrets was that you didn't get to allow that lady to apologize. I'm wondering, as you look back across the career that you've had, what was your single greatest regret?
Oh, let me see. I don't have too many regrets, because I did what I thought I should have done. I told our stories. I remember when I started writing, and I was in my own quiet way, I protest really hard. Overtown was not known to white people. They didn't know that term. They called the area the Central Negro District. And on the second reference in the story, it would be the CND. And so when I started writing about, I was telling our stories about Overtown, I would use that term. And I explained that it's known as the Central Negro District, but we called it Overtown. And I kept saying Overtown, and they would take it out of my stories. The editor would take it out. And one day I went up and I said, "Why do you take that out?" I said, "It's Overtown to us." He said, "Well, nobody knows." I say, "Thousands of people know this area, even whites, as Overtown." I said, "You can't keep taking it out. It's Overtown." to us, not the Central Negro District. And so he said to me, well, you can't say I'm going over town. That's bad grammar. You have to say I'm going to Overtown. I said, whatever. Just keep it in, whatever. And so those kind of fights that we have to have, I'm glad I was able to stand up. I'm glad that I have no regrets when there was a war when Papa Doc, they were having a lot of trouble in Haiti. And there was on the front page of the paper that morning, I opened it, and this woman who was pregnant, half naked, laying in the street. They would not have put that on the front page had that been a white woman. And I protested. I protested. And I didn't know if I was going to lose my job. I think I was the only black then protesting that, saying something about that. I thought that was awful. It was disrespectful to her, and they shouldn't have done it. And so the editor who was trying to fire me said to me, well, I ran it by somebody else who was black, I think she said. And they thought it was all right. And I said, but it's not. And she was lying. She did not. She did not run it. But that's what they wanted to portray. You know, not the beauty, but what they thought was ugly. So I don't have too many regrets because in my own way, I fought. I stood up to them when I should have. I didn't back down. And sometimes I remember one time I'd written a memo and the manager, the city editor called me into his office. And before I went, I started clearing my desk because I thought he was going to fire me. So when I got there, he said, well, I just want to tell you that we're going to give you a raise. And I was so shocked. I went back to my desk and put all that stuff back on my desk. But you never know. You know, when you speak up and you stand up for what is right, first of all, people will respect you when you stand up for your people and you're not ashamed of them. I was never ashamed of my people and our culture and what we did. I told the story of Good Bread Alley and how the people, why it got its name, you know, because they had these battles about who made the best bread.
Yes, African Americans
Yes,
versus the
that's right.
Hanians.
That's right. So that's what I told that story. And so I was never ashamed to tell our story. I love our culture. I love the mixture of our culture. And so I love telling it. So they could never say that I cowered down at anything. I might have been a little quiet, but then when I went to my desk and they saw my copy, they know they hadn't won. They know who the winner was. So that's how we did it.
Greetings, Miss Hines and Nadege. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
right here. My question is, in your years of work, did you also connect nationally with other supporting entities, like maybe groups within your professional organizations and so forth? And if so, what were some of the ones that you connected with?
Yeah, I was, are you asking me about professional organizations?
Right,
Yes,
yes.
I was a member for a long time, and I've been saying I'm going to go back of the National Association of Black Journalists, and I was a member of the local chapter. But then my mother got sick, and I had to take care of her at home, and I couldn't afford the dues, and I couldn't afford the time away from her, and so I just sort of dropped off the scene. But for a long time, I was very active in the National Association of Black Journalists. And then in 2000, I believe it was, the Southeast Regional Chapter named me to the Hall of Fame. So then yeah, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of that. But that's about, and then I've been involved in a lot of women's stuff, you know, working for women and whatever I can do. Sometimes most of the stuff I do is really behind the scenes. I'm not really a big joiner
Bea is a
of stuff.
mentor to so many. She's being so modest. She is a mentor to so many young people. Like we all call her Mama Bea
That's
because
right.
like
These are my children.
she adopts us and she shows us the ropes. She will sit in your backyard. Like she speaks life into us.
Yeah.
And we need that now more than ever to have elders who speak life into us. But Bea does that for so many young people across so many different professions, not just journalism.
Yeah. I'm Femi. I'm keep referring to Femi.
This is
because
Femi right here,
this is
y'all.
Femi.
She's
This-
hiding her face.
that's my sweet girl. I met her when she was 17 years old, and she came to the Herald as the first copy girl at the Miami Herald.
A
And it was
prolific writer herself.
she is. She's so talented. She gave me a notebook of poems, I think when she was 18, and I kept it until when about last year she got it back. All those years, everywhere I moved, I would pack that book and take it with me. I knew one day I would see Femi, and in the middle, during that time, she spent a number of years in Africa, so I didn't see her. I didn't know where she was at the time, but I still held on to her book, and I think I moved 2 times while you were in Africa.
And one last thing to embarrass Femi, I recently found out doing research on Femi because she was recently honored on Black Miami Day this
That's
month
right.
for Women's History Month.
Yes, she was.
That Femi opened for the last poets when she was a student at Miami-Dade College.
Mhm.
So, I mean, a very important like figure in Miami's Black arts movement,
Yes.
theater, Afro arts. Again, our history is so important because there are so
You,
many
you know
ways.
we're in trouble with her.
I know she's gonna
Yeah,
get us
yeah,
after this,
she'll get
but
us.
you know what? We believe in giving people their flowers, and
That's
so we will
right.
not sit here and not love up on you,
That's
Femi,
right.
because you're amazing.
That's
So
right.
thank you for being here. We have another question over
Okay.
here.
Yes, hi, and good morning. Sorry, I came in, we came in late, so I didn't get to get an introduction on you, but I just love your boldness and the way you conducted yourself from, all the different experience you had, whether it was, I know you didn't, probably didn't feel like saying it was racism or whatever, but I just love the way you conducted yourself. And I wanted to know what was the highest moments that you've had when you challenged someone that tried to put you down.
When I challenged someone who tried to put me
Yeah,
down,
yeah,
it
yeah.
was the same woman I told you about. Incidentally, she had been named she got the highest honor that an editor could get, editor of the year.
Is she still around?
No, she died. She died before she could even receive it. They had written a well, there is a God. That's all I can tell you. she, she, I'm sorry, but what was your question again? Okay, she was one. Um, when she became the editor of the department that I was working in, which was the features department at that time. They had moved me from the city desk to features, and she became the editor. And there was 2 gay people in the department. A young woman who dressed like a little hippie, who was as sweet as she could be and smart as a whip. An old person who wrote a column called "The Column with a Heart." Her name is Eleanor Hart. She's passed on now. And Bea Hines, who was the black person. So she started with the young gay people. She fired the first gay young man. Then she fired the little hippie, and she fired Eleanor. She asked Eleanor to retire. It broke her heart, and she cried on my shoulder in the bathroom. She said I was going to retire anyway in a few months, but she asked me to retire, which really put a damper on it. And then the next person she fired was a young man who was also gay, smart and creative, and just took us to prize winning situations every year. And she fired him. And I said to Eleanor, I said, "Well, I'm next." And she said, "Well, how do you say that?" I said, "She fired the gays, she fired the hippie, she fired the old person. I'm the only black. I'm next." And so Eleanor didn't believe it, but she was working on it. So, but anyway, what happened is when she became the editor of the department, she went to everybody in the department and she told them what she expected of them, what she wanted from them. And when she got to my desk, she turned around and walked away. And when it was time for raises, I got a raise, but she took me in the cafeteria and she said that I'm going to give you this raise, but you haven't earned it, and blah 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 and blah blah blah, because she was giving me assignments like man on the street, go up and talk to people. People didn't want to talk to you on the street,
Mhm.
and it was hard to get those kind of stories. And then and I had been used to doing front page stuff, significant stories, and she didn't want me to do them anymore. So she went to the editor, the managing editor, and said that I was a poor performer, and all he could see was what she was giving me to write about. And so Juanita Green again stepped in and told him the truth. And she said, keep your back covered. And so what happened is, I said to her when at that time when she told me she was going to give me the raise, but, and I said, wait a minute. I said, I've always gotten merit raises on my performance. I said, if you don't think that I'm lived up to this, don't give me a raise now. Wait until I've come up to your expectations. And she was so shocked. I said, don't give me the raise. I don't want it now because I want you, I want to earn this. And I said, and besides, I don't know what you expect from me. I said, you took everybody in the department out to lunch and you told them what you wanted from them and what you expected from them. And I said, when you got to me, you walked away. You never told me. And I said, I felt discriminated against. And are you saying I'm a racist? I said, I did not say that. I said, I felt that you discriminated against me. Same thing. So she said, okay, well, when do you want to go to lunch? Now she's scared because I could sue. When do you want to go to lunch? I said, okay, whatever you say. Okay, let's go Wednesday. I said, all right. So I know her. In my church, my pastor used to say, know God and get acquainted with the devil. So I knew what she was going to do. So that morning I had a nice two tuna fish sandwiches. I made great tuna fish salad. And I made 2 sandwiches and I had baked cookies for my children. So I brought some cookies and I brought my lunch. So when it was time to go, I knew she wasn't going to take me to a nice restaurant outside of the building. She was going to take me to the cafeteria. So when it was time to go to lunch, she says, are you ready to go downstairs, third floor to the cafeteria? I said, yes, let me get my lunch. Oh, no, it's on the Herald. The Herald's going. I said, oh, no, I don't eat in the cafeteria unless I bring my own lunch. And she was so shocked. I don't like the food there. She was taking them out to a nice restaurant. Oh, well, where do you want to go? I said, it's okay. I brought my lunch. We could go to the cafeteria. And she's begging me almost to let's go out. So I said, okay, well, save your lunch for later. And we went out. That woman was so nervous that she told me all about her mean mother. I don't know to this day what she wanted from me. She never said, this is what I want you to do. But she would lighten up some because now she knows she doesn't have a dummy. And the other thing I did was I kept a running log of how she was treating me. Like she would send me to the library for files, which was not my job. I was a reporter. I was not a copy girl, or I was not a clerk anymore. I'm a reporter. At that time, 10 years, I had been a reporter for 10 years. So she stopped me one day on the way to, I was leaving. Would you please go to the, not please, would you go and get these files for me from the library? And I said, let me put my things down. What, are you saying you don't want to go? I said, no. I said, let me put my things down. I'll get them. I put my things down, went back to the library, got the files that she wanted, gave them to her, went back to my desk, and I know she's looking at me. I usually lock my desk, unlock my desk, got my pad out, looked at the clock, and wrote down the time. Went to the library for Janet, told me to go and put it in my desk, and purposely left it unlocked. And she read it, and she backed off me for a while, like I had a bad disease. So you have to know what to do. You have to know how to live through these things.
Hello.
Oh, over here. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Jacob McCall. Um, I just wanted to ask you, did you ever get an opportunity to travel internationally or maybe make that trip to Africa, um, um, despite having lost the opportunity earlier?
I did go to Africa, but I went to South Africa. And, as the Lord would have it, I didn't have to pay a dime. I had been volunteering with a school while I was working. And my mother, I was taking care of my mother at home at the time. She was bedridden. But I was working full time and I would always volunteer at Charles Drew. And I had a friend who lived in California and we partnered with a school in South Africa in Soweto, and they needed computers and medicines. My friend Agnes was retiring in California as head nurse of the hospital, and she sent cartons of medicines and bandages and stuff that some rich person helped us to ship over to South Africa, and all those computers. And then Mr. the principal of the school said, B, we want you to go with us and you won't have to pay a dime. And I went to South Africa and I was so happy. I'll never forget that trip as long as I live. And those little children met us that day on the line in the street. Some of them, the little shirts were too short, the sleeves were too short, they'd outgrown them. The little girls had the prettiest little braids, and they were all clean, and they were singing in perfect harmony, and I'm crying. It was so beautiful. I never saw anything like that. I will never forget that. And that's how I was rewarded. I was able to go. And I was telling somebody recently about that story, and he said, "Well, B, when I go to Africa, you're gonna go sometime this year." I hope he didn't forget. I better call him up and see if he forgot, because I'm ready. The year that I went to Africa, and let me see, my mother, it was must have been 1999. 1999. Yes. We went by the president, Mandela was out of the country at the time, but we went past the where he lived, and we were able to go to the house that he shared with his first wife. It's now a museum. And it was right after they had killed all those children. Remember, they had that massacre, they killed all those young children. So their pictures were on walls. Somebody had painted their pictures on walls along one of the streets in Soweto. It was quite an eye opener. Quite an eye opener. I'm
Do we have
glad I
time
went.
for any more questions? Okay. 2 more questions.
Emmanuel George, Ms. Hines, it's a pleasure to meet you. Nadege, I'm a big fan as always.
Thank you.
Just hearing your stories about Black Miami, was there any, sorry, was there any stories that you may have had about Black Broward?
No, I didn't. I did not. I knew some things about Broward. I knew about, the Sistrunks and all, but I didn't really get into that because I was so busy. Miami-Dade County kept me so busy. There was so much going on all the time. You got to really watch your back. You got to, and I said to somebody who asked me, how did I endure? How did I make it? Sometimes I would drive to work crying. The tears would be rolling down my cheeks. And I would get in that parking lot and I would look in the mirror, make sure my hair was right, put a little powder on my face, and I walk in there with the biggest smile because they would never know that they hurt me. I would never know. And so they didn't know how to really take me. They didn't know how to take me because they would do evil things to me. And I said, oh, somebody made a mistake. And I knew they didn't make a mistake. It was on purpose. But that's how God gave me to handle it. And that's how I made it through. My faith played a big part in getting through all those years. Thank you.
Hello, Miss Bea Hines over here.
Over here. Okay. Gotcha.
You can tell by my accent, I'm from London, England.
Okay. Sound like my sister-in-law.
It's so nice to hear from hearing your story, very inspirational. The question I would ask is, being in England, you never really heard about Black history that much. It was so late that we started to learn anything about Black history, Black culture. Was there anyone from England during your years that you were connected to? Did you get support from any Black people in England?
No.
None at all.
No Black people, but there was one woman, Ena Norton. Ena Norton was from England, and she was a big supporter of mine. In fact, we worked in the same department. She covered the health, but we would have to turn on a list of story ideas. And every time I would get my story ideas with red lines, and the editor would say, "This one is doing this. This one had this idea. This," and one of them was Ena Norton. And I went to her and I said, "Are you doing the story on it?" She said, "No." She says, "No, go ahead." I said, "Well, Janet, oops." The lady, the editor. Sorry, the editor said that you were doing this story. And she said, "No, B, I'm not doing it. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it." But I couldn't unless she okayed it. But no, she was a big supporter of mine. But I know that people, one of the things that I learned with people coming from Jamaica and Haiti and other places in the Caribbean, other blacks had not had the same kind of experiences that we had. They had not been told you can't do this because you're black, or you can't. They had not been put down and in slavery and bound like we had been. So our journey has been a little different, and I think that's one of the reasons why many of us have not connected as we should, as much as we could have. I was going on to a rehearsal. I used to sing with a group, the Miami Oratorio Society, and one of the women who was singing them was from Jamaica, and there was something happening that day. It was in '68, and she said, no, it was in the '70s, in the '80s, and she said, well, what do you people want? She calls you people. And I said, what do you mean, you people? I said, when did you get to America? She said, I've been here since 1968. I said, girl, by the time you got here, we had been lynched and burned and hanged. And then I said, we paved the way for you. We paved the way for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. The civil unrest that followed the murder of George Floyd resulted in demonstrations and riots and a lot of public discourse on the topic of race. What was that moment like for you, and what were those conversations like in the newsroom?
Yeah, that as a mother, I felt all the pain his mother must have felt, and his mother wasn't even alive. He was calling out for her. He was calling me. And so the stories that I wrote after, the columns that I wrote after, was centered around things that were happening to us. I was not afraid to call out the cops who did. That man killed him on purpose. He knew he was killing him. And I said that in one of my columns. He watched while this black man died under his knee. And so I had to write columns and call these things out. I didn't want people to think that I'm too easy, or I don't see what's going on. I'm so old that I don't know what's happening. I know what's going on. And so every time in that, if you recall, at that particular time, there were a rash of things happening. Brianna was killed. That young man was killed eating ice cream on his couch by a white cop. The young man jogging through a neighborhood. So I had to call that out. People need to know that this is wrong, whether they listen or not. They need to know, and then you have to remind black people not to forget. Don't forget, we have to be on guard at all times. We can't forget. We can't be quiet. We can't be so passive and so forgiving that we have to just sit by and let people do things to us and not say anything. I don't think God it requires that of us.
On that note, thank you so much, B. This has been such a blessing.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have been here.
Wow, oh wow. Thank you so much, Bea Hines, for sharing with us, for your example of faith and grace and perseverance, using your voice, using your pen to stand for all of us. It has been an honor for us to have you today. And Nadege, elegant, wonderful as always. Appreciate you so very much. I want to thank everybody who came out today. I want to thank everybody who was able to watch online. I want to acknowledge Allison Grubbs, the director of Broward County Libraries. I mentioned her earlier, but she was able to make it. I also like to take a moment and recognize all the staff from Broward County Libraries here at Arlick. Let's see, who's over there? Oh, Arlanzo and Lindsay and David, Anitra King, our assistant manager, Dr. LaRoche, Tia, everyone. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing to make this a success. Okay, well, that's going to conclude our panel this morning. I want to just take a moment and invite you to the other programs that we have coming up the rest of today. On Friday and on Saturday. Orlando, if we can get the PowerPoint up, there is a QR code that you can use and scan the complete program that we have and get a listing. But just briefly, I can tell you that today we have tours of our special collections. One of the things that makes us one of the flagship institutions in this library system is our archives upstairs. We have over 1 million items, manuscript, rare books, art, and what have you. And so we're offering tours, and you'll get to see some of the stories from the 1970s. We have the collection of Esther Rolle. This year is the 50th anniversary of Good Times airing on television. We have her photographic collection. We have her Emmy that she won upstairs. You'll get a chance to see that, as well as part of the collection of Alex Haley. And we also have the collection of Dr. Niara Sadarkis. So that is available to you today. At 2 p.m. across the hall in our auditorium, we will be uplifting the voice of a literary icon, Toni Morrison. And so we're going to be watching a little bit of The Pieces I Am, the documentary on her life. And we have a scholarly panel, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, along with Dr. Regis Fox and Dr. Zakia Odia will be here, and they'll be in a session with Jill Tracy, radio personality here. So you don't want to miss that. Tomorrow, we are not here during the day. We are over next door. I see some of my friends from the Urban League here. We are next door at the Urban League for our neighborhood revitalization symposium. It's one thing to reflect on the history, but we also want to plant some seeds and plan for what's next. And so we'll do that tomorrow. We'll start at 9 a.m. with an opportunity tour just to get a sense of some of the development that's taking place and some of the opportunities for investors to get involved and business owners. They will go on until about 3 o'clock. Then at 6 p.m., we'll be again over at the auditorium, and we have coming to town Michael Harriot. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Black AF History, an unwhitewashed version of American history. You don't want to miss that. We're really excited to have him. And then immediately following that, we're going to have a party with a purpose. We're able to make all of this festival free because of the generous donations of our community. And so we're going to have a ticketed event called Destination Roots, which is going to celebrate the music of the 1970s. So funk, disco. Mama Femi, you coming back? You going to dance with us? Oh, we'll work on that. We'll work on that. But we're going to have a good time tomorrow night. The tickets right now are $30. They'll be $40 at the door. That starts again immediately after Michael Harriot's lecture. Saturday, we kick off with our children's focused event. We have Nana Camille Yarbrough. She's a proud 90-year-old poet, performer, singer, but she wrote a children's book called Cornrows in 1979 that was republished last year. And we're going to bring her to talk about that, but she's going to be in conversation with another Coretta Scott King Award winning author, Corinne Betancourt, who has recently won another award from the NAACP. But then we're going to have an intergenerational conversation about Black aesthetics and our children, talking about hair pride, and that will conclude with a children's hair show. So it's going to be really special. You don't want to miss that. We have Dr. Daniel Black. We have Master Genealogist Tony Burrows coming. We have Dr. Erica Williams coming from Spelman College. We have Dr. Aisha Hardison coming from the University of Kansas. It's a really fantastic lineup. So please take a look. Please make plans to come back and be with us. With that, I want to thank all of you for being here. Please come back to the African American Research Library and Cultural Center. Thank you. Thank you both.